come, he said to them, "Let us go across to the other side." And leaving the crowd, they took him with them in the boat just as he was, and other boats were with him. And a great windstorm arose, and the waves were breaking into the boat so that the boat was already filling. He was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And they woke him and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" And he awoke and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. He said to them, "Why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith?" And they were filled with great fear and said to one another, "Who then is this that even the wind and sea obey him?" Let's pray. God, thank you for your word, and thank you that in your word we have these incredible pictures and moments from the life of Jesus and his disciples. Truly, when we turn to them and we reflect, we can begin to envision our own lives walking with Jesus in the life of these disciples. None of us here have been upon a boat where Jesus was sleeping in the stern as the storm arose, yet every one of us have encountered the fierce and dreadful storms of life, and we have, like these disciples, wondered, does Jesus even care what's happening to me right now? And so as we read this story, God, we see ourselves, we see our own lack of faith, our own temptation to fear over trusting in God and what we know you're able to do. And so, Father, as we read this morning and hear of Jesus standing and commanding the storm to cease, may we be reminded that is the very same Jesus we serve today. And that as the storms of life come to us, you, our God, are able in every moment to both sustain and strengthen us, but also, God, to speak to the storm and bring it to an end. And so help us, Father. Forgive us for our lack of faith. Forgive us for our lack of trust. And build and grow within us a deeper, more abiding and present confidence in the reality that you, our God, are with us. You are near to us. And in the midst of these storms, you are not absent from us. We're going to open your word in a few moments and look into the Psalms and see King David in one of the greatest storms he ever saw in his life. May that also be a testimony to us, God, of how to trust in you in the middle of the storm. Teach us, God, this morning. Shape us, mold our hearts. Shake away the dullness of our hearts and break us free from confidence in the flesh, that we might grow in our dependence on you, in our faith in you, in our trust in you. Help us, God, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Turn and join me in Psalm 3. It has been our habit now for I'm not sure how many years to spend some time every summer in the Psalms and to walk through these. I delight in the Psalms, but I don't know a time when I'll ever take up Psalm 1 and preach straight through to Psalm 150. So this is our way of working through the Psalms, and we're going to spend the next several weeks in the Psalms. For me, the beauty of the Psalms does not lie in their poetic language or the well-crafted composition, although we think about psalms that stand out to us and how beautiful they are, right? The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. It evokes an image of beauty. As the deer pants for the water, so my soul longs after you. These are beautifully well-crafted, poetic statements that move and stir our hearts towards God. But the beauty for me in the Psalms lies in just how real they are. Just how practical and down to earth and raw the Psalms can be. The The Psalter is chock full of real life with all of its joys and all of its pains and sorrows. And I find that the Psalms are a safe place for suffering saints. When I say it's a safe place, I don't mean to say that it's safe because it will affirm all of your ideas, or it will reassure you that you are right about everything, or it will even protect you from suffering. I mean it's safe because the Psalms will reassure you that your suffering is common to all humanity and reorient you towards the God who can sustain you in suffering. Psalm 3 is a psalm for suffering saints. It's a piece of biography from the life of King David that can serve as a guide for you and me when we are struggling. I don't know about you, but in my life, I find I tend to get stuck in struggles. When problems come, when sorrows abound, when difficulty is facing me, I find myself often running in circles looking for a path forward and finding no off-ramp from just a spiral of what's happening to me and what's going on. But Psalm 3 shows us a path. It shows us a way to get unstuck in our suffering and a way to move forward and make progress. So if you would, look with me at Psalm 3. I'm going to read the entire Psalm, 8 verses. It says this: "O Lord, how many are my foes? Many are rising against me. Many are saying of my soul, there is no salvation for him in God. Selah. But you, O Lord, are a shield about me, my glory and the lifter of my head. I cried aloud to the Lord, and he answered me from his holy hill. Selah. I lay down and slept. I woke again, for the Lord sustained me. I will not be afraid of many thousands of people who have set themselves against me all around. Arise, O Lord, save me, O my God, for you strike all my enemies on the cheek. You break the teeth of the wicked. Salvation belongs to the Lord. Your blessing be on your people. Selah." Psalm 3 is a beautiful biography from David's life. And in it, I think we find a perfect path for those who are suffering. I want to give it to you this morning in 3 simple words that I hope you can remember and take with you. 3 words that we're going to see in this text: identify, acknowledge, ask. Can you remember those 3 words? Can you stay with me on those 3 words? Identify, acknowledge, ask. First of all, King David, as he pens this psalm, he begins by identifying his suffering. He's assessing the situation he's in. He's looking around. "Oh Lord, how many are my foes? Many are rising against me. Many are saying of my soul, there is no salvation for him in God." He says, when I look around at those who are opposed to me, those who are trying to overwhelm me and overcome me, they have become too numerous to count. He's outnumbered, and we would say outgunned in this situation. He is overwhelmed by the fact that the multitude of people, not a few people, not I've got this person over here who doesn't like me and this guy's trying to cause me trouble. He says, when I look out there, there are an innumerable amount of people rising up against me, and they want to do harm to me. In fact, that phrase he uses there when he says, many are rising against me, I want you to take note of that because it's going to come back later in the text. The word where it's translated there, rising against me, the idea is they're confronting me. These people are confronting me. And what do they say when they come to confront King David? He tells us, they are saying of my soul, there is no salvation for him in God. They're saying, David, there's no hope for you in this situation. God is not going to rescue you this time. You're not going to slip through the cracks and get off the hook this time. You are done. And that negative narrative of there's no hope, this situation is hopeless, you're helpless, God's not coming to rescue you, they heap that on him. And I trust that just like you and I, David must have been tempted in the midst of this situation to begin to believe that. When you get one person coming to you saying, this situation you're facing, it's hopeless. Not even God can rescue you from this. Well, that's one thing you might go, you're just negative. But when a few people start to come to you, or many people, a multitude of people start to say, there's no hope. Why are you pretending like anything good's going to come out of this? You are hopeless. Well, our human hearts, our flesh begin to wonder, am I deceived? Am I lying to myself? Is there really no hope in this situation? Do you know what it feels like to have others gather around you in your suffering and basically give you a message of defeat? I think most of us can identify with this reality. Maybe not in the same circumstance David's in, but you probably know from experience what it's like to have a bunch of counselors like Job's friends gather around and go, hey, just tell us how you sinned. Maybe if you stopped doing that, this wouldn't be happening to you. Or, hey, you're just dealing with life. This is how it is. There's no hope. Maybe instead of trusting in God, you need to go start working on this thing or figure this out or do that. We typically in life have experience of what it looks like to have bad counselors, or in David's case, genuine enemies confronting him and saying, there's no hope for you in God. Accept your fate. It doesn't get any better. But I need you to understand that this psalm, Psalm 3 for David, it comes from an extremely personal situation. You read at the top of Psalm 3, just above verse 1, it says, a psalm of David when he fled from Absalom, his son. Can I give you just a note on the Psalms? Normally in the Bible, when you read text above verse 1, that's not part of the biblical text. There's a heading and it might give you an idea what it's going to talk about. In the Psalms, those superscriptions, we call them, that come before the first verse, they're part of the biblical text. That was penned. This is a psalm of David when he fled from Absalom, his son. David, as he writes Psalm 3, is on the run for his life from his son Absalom. Absalom has risen against David in an attempted coup. He's trying to run David out of power in Jerusalem, take his throne, and in the process, kill him. And the situation is so serious that King David, the fearless warrior king, the one who has destroyed thousands of enemies with God at his side, is on the run. He's on the lam from his own son. He's running for the hills. He's taken his closest counselors and some important people and some personal security guards, essentially, and he has taken off for the hills. Now, mind you, let me give you some context, some background of what's been happening in King David's life up to this point. This comes after David's sin with Bathsheba. You're familiar with that story, and really probably the most well-known moral failure of this man. It comes after his sin with Bathsheba. It comes after the death of their child. And it comes after the death of his oldest son, Amnon. In fact, that guy, Amnon, who you might not know a whole lot about, he's really important to this story because understanding Amnon helps us understand Absalom. See, Amnon is the eldest son of David and the one who violated his sister Tamar. Absalom, when he learns of what has happened in this situation, is absolutely outraged. He pretty much immediately from the biblical text, you can tell, wants to kill his brother. But what he does instead is bring his sister Tamar into his own house where she lives with him. And Absalom seems to spend the next couple of years stewing and plotting how he's going to exact his revenge on his brother Amnon. Now, as much as Absalom is enraged with his brother, it seems perhaps he's even more enraged with his father David, because David does essentially nothing about this heinous sin his son has committed. And so Absalom spends 2 years waiting and plotting until finally he goes to King David and says, I'm going to go out to the sheep shearers. I want everybody to come with me. And King David says, no, we're not all going to come. He says, well, at least send my brother Amnon with me. And David relents. And what does he do when he gets out to the sheep shearers? He fulfills his revenge against his brother Amnon. He kills him. After doing that, Absalom flees for protection because, again, his father is King David. And whatever you know about King David from the scriptures, you must know that he is known to kill people when they are in the wrong. He is a fearless warrior. And Absalom thinks, if I go back to my father after he finds out that I killed his oldest son, my brother, he will likely kill me as well. So Absalom flees to his grandfather, flees away, worrying about what David might do in response. The interesting irony of the story is in 2 Samuel, where you read about all this, we read that the whole time Absalom is hiding out from his father, it tells us David's heart was longing after his son Absalom. It seems David always had a soft spot for his son. So David is back in Jerusalem, longing to be reconciled with his son, but unwilling to do anything to accomplish this reconciliation. Absalom is off a long distance away, hiding and wanting protection from David. And after 3 years, David is confronted by a woman who's pleading her case about her own son, but secretly, she's been sent by one of David's chief counselors and leaders of his army, Joab. Joab sends this woman in, and if you're familiar with the story of Nathan the prophet, when he confronts David about his sin with Bathsheba, it's a very similar story where she starts to plead his case, and eventually she kind of pulls the, you're the man. You're the one who I'm talking about here. And so she confronts David about his son Absalom and his need to reconcile to his son, and David relents and sends for his son Absalom to be brought back to Jerusalem. But he says, bring him to Jerusalem, but don't let him come into my presence. And for 2 years, Absalom lives in Jerusalem, near to his father David, the king, but not ever coming into his presence. David absolutely forbids it. Absalom finally gets fed up. Let me kind of speed the story up. And he's trying to get the attention of King David and get an audience with him, and nobody will go plead his case. So Joab, that same counselor, happens to have a field right next to Absalom, and Absalom says, well, I'll get your attention. He lights his field on fire. That was apparently what he needed to do to get an audience before King David. Joab goes to the king and says, you need to speak to your son. So Absalom, having grown more and more embittered against his father by the day, finally comes, and you get this story in 2 Samuel again, where Absalom comes in and bows before his father, the king, and it kind of feels like it's a word of reconciliation. And then about one entire verse later, it says, so Absalom begins to plot against his father. The bitterness and the rage that has grown within him over the years towards his father leads him to plot and plan for a coup, an attempt to overthrow King David and run him out of Jerusalem. And so what Absalom does is he goes around the various areas in Jerusalem talking to people, being very nice and kind to them, kind of making people really fall in love with him. And he says to them anytime they have an issue, he says, you know, if I was in charge, things would be much different around here. I would judge between people and settle all these disputes, and everything would be wonderful. And you know what the people do? They eat it up. He gains quite a following of folks who are starting to think, you know, it might be time for us to get rid of King David. This guy seems like a much better choice. He garners enough support that he's finally ready to put his plan into action. And he heads out of town to another city some distance away, and there, with many of his followers and his supporters around him, he crowns himself king of Israel. He says, I'm now the king. And word of this comes back to King David. And King David takes it seriously enough that he says, I've got to get out of here. Now, that's quite a bit of story. You could go read the 4 or 5 chapters where that unfolds in 2 Samuel, and you should. But I want you to understand, all of that is in view when you read this one little line. A psalm of David when he fled from Absalom, his son. All that, what's going on, all the way back to his sin with Bathsheba, this whole thing has been brewing along and along. And we must understand that to know what David is going through in this moment when he's fled and he's hiding in the hills from his son and fearing for his life. But I want you to see how striking it is that that's the situation. And here's what David says about it when he takes pen to paper to write. "O Lord, how many are my foes? Many are rising against me. Many are saying of my soul, there is no salvation for him in God." That's it. That's the entire identification of his situation that he records for us in this psalm. He's not doing what we think he might do. You know, today, if somebody makes a left turn in front of you in traffic that you don't like, you might go home, take to social media and make a 5,000-word post to describe how difficult your life is and how overwhelmed and challenged we are. But King David, fleeing for his life into the mountains, his son trying to kill him, he says, "O Lord, how many are my foes? Many are rising against me. Many are saying of my soul, there is no salvation for him in God." He's not denying the very real suffering that he is enduring in this situation. He's not being dramatic, and he's not censoring himself as he identifies the situation before God. Yet, he doesn't do what I think is our impulse in suffering. He doesn't go on and on and on and on and on about the situation and every detail and how terrible it is and how awful it is and how there's no hope and how everything looks dreadful. You see, if we think about getting stuck in suffering, I think this is where most of us get stuck. We get stuck in the first step, identify the suffering. We spend all our time and mental energy trying to make sense of what's going on to us and explain it and make sure we can put it in terms that we can clearly communicate to others and make sure we get all the different facets of it exactly right. And we spin ourselves around and around and around in a spiral of identifying the kind of suffering we find ourselves in. We make sure we fully understand, but in doing so, we often fixate on the situation at hand. Our eyes and our heart get locked in on the suffering before us, and we can recount it to ourselves, and in fact we do, right? That mental narrative that we carry with us day after day, often it is just awash with recounting, retelling the story of the suffering and the pain that we're experiencing. But we never move past focusing on the situation. So how can we get unstuck in the face of suffering if all we do is just walk in the circle, kind of identifying the thing as we go around it and retelling the story? Well, King David gives us a direction forward. You remember the second word, identify your suffering. The second word, acknowledge. What does he acknowledge? Well, look at verse 3. He acknowledges God. But you, O Lord, are a shield about me, my glory and the lifter of my head. As David turns from identifying his suffering, his first move is to acknowledge God. It's not a planning session or a strategy meeting. Remember, he's on the run for his life with a small detail of personal security and some servants. But he doesn't sit down to talk military strategy. He goes to the deeply ingrained knowledge he has of who his God is. That's the move. From my suffering to my God. Everybody wants David to buy the lie that God will not save him, but David already knows the truth. God is his shield. God is his glory or his honor. God is the one who will lift his head. He says, God's my protector. He's the shield about me in the midst of this. He's been assaulted by enemies too many times and rescued by God too many times to not know that's how God works. God hasn't abandoned him. God hasn't forgotten about him. God is his protector. God is his glory. It's another way of saying God is my honor. David is the celebrated king of Israel, right? If we're looking according to the flesh, who has greater honor than the king, right? When the king comes by, everybody knows they're supposed to bow and give deference and show respect to the king. When he takes flight from Absalom, he has many personal soldiers and servants to attend to all of his needs and protect him, but he's not counting on them for protection, nor is he counting on them for his glory and honor. He is looking to God and saying, the reason I have any honor is not because I'm King David and all these people listen to me and do what I say. The reason I have honor is because I belong to God. As long as David knew that he belonged to God, that was the most important truth he could cling to. And that's exactly what he does. I want you to hear this very clearly. The most important, essential step to getting unstuck from the suffering that you are dealing with in life is moving your heart from identifying your suffering to acknowledging your God. That's it. Honestly, if we could just get there, the rest will flow pretty naturally. And again, I'm not suggesting we shouldn't identify our suffering. That's step one. But we have to move on to acknowledging who God is. Who do you know God to be? Or to put it differently, because of the way I tend to experience this in my own life, who was God about 10 seconds before that problem hit? Because 10 seconds before the issue sprang up, I had a very clear vision of who God was. 10 seconds after it hits me in the face, all of a sudden it's as if I've forgotten there's even a God. We often suffer as if God doesn't exist. He's just pushed to the sides of our mind because we're fixed in on the problem. Which is why it's so important for us to not just identify the suffering, but acknowledge God. Whether you see it or not, whether you can perceive it or understand it, from the midst of the storm, God has not changed. You ever sit around on a stormy day and look out the window at the front of your house? When it really starts to come down and storm, it can impede your vision of things just a few feet out your front door. You can't see things clearly because the storm is clouding your vision. And it's very much the same way spiritually. The storms of life come against us and it clouds our vision of who God is, and we start to forget. And all we see is the raindrops and the lightning and the thunder. All we perceive is the storm, and we forget that God's still there. David says, I'm going to identify who God is. You, O Lord, are a shield about me, my glory and the lifter of my head. See, he's identifying who God is, but he's also pointing out what God does for his people. He describes him as the lifter of my head. Now, this is not David describing a proud posture, right? He's not going, this nose up to the air, arrogant, prideful posture. But what happens to us when we endure suffering? When you have physical suffering or emotional suffering, when you find yourself to be embarrassed or ashamed or despairing in a situation, we kind of have this physical posture. What do we do, right? We hunch over and look to the ground. You ever been just like caught dead to rights? You know you did something wrong and somebody just busted you. What do? You hang your head in shame. And in this case, David's head is hung. I don't know how much he's aware that his sinful actions kicked off this chain of things that has come to haunt him. And I'm not even saying this is all happening because it's his fault. But either way, his head is bowed down low and he is guilty, embarrassed, despairing. And all of a sudden he says, but God is the one who lifts up my head. God is the one who restores me and fixes my vision, because if you're just staring at the ground, that's a bad place to be in if you want to go anywhere, right? God lifts our heads. We do not, hear me very clearly, we do not pick ourselves up by our own bootstraps. The Bible doesn't teach us anywhere, just get tougher, just pick yourself up again, right? That's worldly wisdom, right? Rub some dirt on it, walk it off, you'll be fine. But God says, actually, you weren't fine to start with. You're not fine now. You're never going to be fine. But I'm your God. I will rescue you, and I'll lift your head. I'll pick you up again and again and again and set your vision where it needs to be. He points our eyes forward to who He is and what He's able to do, He reframes our perspective and He restores our hope. So this Godward first strategy that David has when he's thinking about his suffering is worthy of imitation. He could have talked about a lot of things, but the first step past his suffering is to acknowledge God. How differently might you and I endure suffering if we can just imitate that? I mean, let's be real for a second, right? In your mind and heart, I think you're probably already thinking about the kind of suffering you're enduring in life right now. And you probably, if I gave you a chance, if I just said, hey, everybody line up and meet me in my office when we're done, and you'll have a chance to tell me all about your personal suffering. I'd be here until what? Forever? Because we could recount it over and over and over again. And the situations are different, but can I tell you a secret? At the root, they're all kind of the same, aren't they? We have unique versions of suffering, and yet they all find their root in the broken sinfulness of this world we live in. So instead of that, instead of just recounting our pain forever, you know what we can do? Just acknowledge God for who He is. He's still there. He's still the one who is our shield, our protector, our glory, and the lifter of our head. David is pointing his heart back to God, but I want you to understand he's not settling for pietism. If you leave this morning just thinking, oh, this is just some great spiritual thing, I can just be an ascetic and pretend like there's no suffering, right? I'll just be a stoic. Oh, nothing bothers me. That's not at all what I'm suggesting. Because he moves along to talk about what he actually does. In verse 4, he says, I cried aloud to the Lord, and He answered me from His holy hill. I lay down and slept. I woke again, for the Lord sustained me. I will not be afraid of many thousands of people who have set themselves against me all around. David's not trying to be all spiritual here and ignore the humanity of suffering. There's a very human reality to suffering. To the contrary, as he moves forward, he wants to acknowledge God in some practical ways that you and I can learn from. The first thing David does is has a good cry. Now, if you're paying attention to the text closely, you're about to kind of call me out and go, wait a second. It says he cried aloud to the Lord. That sounds like prayer, not like weeping tears. And you'd be right to point that out, except the context actually tells us that it's a little bit of both. David is definitely expressing here in Psalm 3 for us how in these moments he calls on God to rescue him. When he says, I cried out to the Lord, I think he means with his voice lifted up, he said these words, God, save me. And yet also he's expressing not only how God hears that cry and answers, but he's expressing that I think he actually just wept tears because he was overwhelmed by the suffering he was facing. In fact, I don't just think he did that. I know he did that. Let me tell you how I know, because I read in 2 Samuel chapter 15 where David is recounting the unfolding of this for us. And when he gets to the part where he loads everybody up and says, all right, we're headed out of town. We're leaving now. We have to go so that we can be saved because Absalom's going to come here and kill us. He says this about the journey in 2 Samuel 15 verse 30. It says, but David went up the ascent of the Mount of Olives. So he's climbing the mountain, weeping as he went, barefoot and with his head covered. Pouring tears. King David, the warrior king, barefoot, head covered, mourning, weeping tears. Not only David, and all the people who were with him covered their heads and they went up weeping as they went. This mourning, grieving party of people are walking up the Mount of Olives, trying to flee to safety, and David is just shedding tears. Can I tell you something about the suffering of this life? Sometimes you just need to let the tears loose. Big, tough men in the room, I'm talking to you. Sometimes the most godly thing you can do is just cry. The suffering that we endure in this life is sufficient to induce weeping, and we do no good for anybody by trying to suppress that urge. I don't mean to say that you should be ruled by your emotions or that you're just going to be some big bag of tears every day, every place you go. But I do mean to say that you should not try to crush the humanity within you that acknowledges the pain of a world stained with sin. If you have not had a good cry, it occurs to me you might not be paying attention. because there's a lot of suffering around us. There's a lot of sorrow and pain in this world that we're longing to see Jesus redeem and make new. But in the meantime, my goodness, don't try to squeeze your soul into some tough guy ideal that somebody told you was real masculinity. When you're done with your cry, here's what's next. Lay down and go to sleep. See what he says. I cried aloud to the Lord. He answered me from his holy hill. I lay down and slept. Don't forget the context. He's on the run for his life from his son, who also is a pretty fierce warrior and has a lot of people with him. I don't know about you guys, but if I'd have found myself in that situation that night, I'm not sure I'd have gotten much sleep. In fact, I can envision all the other people with King David when he says, all right, I'm going to lay down and sleep. They're like, what? Are you not aware of the situation here, King David? Do you not know that they could sneak up on us tonight while you're sleeping and kill you and this whole thing's over? When I first studied this passage, my thought was to title this sermon, How to Sleep in the Storm, because of this verse. How do we go to sleep? There's something here for us as hyper-driven Western individualists who somehow have bought the lie that if we don't make sure everything's done exactly the way it needs to get done, if we don't rule the world, it won't work the right way. So we can't go to sleep at night because we're wound so tight because we're trying to manage God's universe for Him. God, if I don't stay awake and figure out how to solve this situation tonight, I'm just going to suffer more tomorrow. When David lays down, he must know that that sleep might be the last one he ever has in this life. He may never wake up from it. And yet, it's exactly what he does. He lays down to sleep, and then look what he says, I woke again, for the Lord sustained me. Why did he wake up again? Because he had a lot of guards and a good military strategy? No, not in the least. He wakes again because God sustained him in his sleep. You can sleep in the middle of immense, overwhelming suffering and trust that God will sustain you. Sometimes the most godly thing that you can do is lay down and take a nap. I mean that from the bottom of my heart. Sometimes the exact thing God needs you to do, instead of staying awake and trying to turn it all over in your head one more time and figure it out, what am I going to do to fix this situation? You need to lay down. You need to remember a little bit of Scripture, like Psalm 121 verses 3 and 4. He will not let your foot be moved. He who keeps you will not slumber. Behold, he who keeps Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. You know why you can sleep? Because God doesn't. He doesn't need to. He doesn't get tired. He's got it. Turns out he's pretty good at ruling the universe without our help. There's a beautiful progression in this text. I lay down and slept. I woke again, for the Lord sustained me. Verse 6, I will not be afraid of many thousands of people who have set themselves against me all around. David acknowledges God, allowing who God is to reframe his concerns, and he cries out to God, and he goes to sleep, and when he wakes up, it's like he's an entirely different person. He's got a whole new perspective. Oh Lord, how many are my foes? Many are rising against me. Many are saying of my soul, there is no salvation for him in God. That's where he started. These people are just pouring on me. There's no hope for you, man. You are done. Your son and all these people, the whole nation is coming after you. And he cries out to God, and he sleeps, and he wakes up, and he says, I will not be afraid of many thousands of people who have set themselves all around me. Physically, he's still running in fear, just for the record. I'm fairly certain from the context, it seems most likely that he records this psalm, that the flight from Absalom is 2 nights long, and it seems like this is between day 1 and day 2, that first night out. Physically, he's still running in fear, but spiritually, he is renewed by God. And he expresses this newfound attitude of confidence in God. He says, I'll not be afraid of thousands who surround me. And just so you know, that's not bravado. That's not David going, I'm super tough. That is confidence in who God is. If you want to get unstuck in your suffering and find a way forward, this is where you need to get to. Acknowledge God for who He is. Call out to Him in faith. Cry your tears. Take your rest and awake with a renewed confidence in God. And if you have to do that day after day after day after day after year for the rest of your life, you can know that you can call out to God and trust. He hears you. He will be with you. A good attitude that David has now after all this is a good start, but it's not the end of the matter. He still has a massive issue in that his son is still pursuing him to take his kingdom and take his life. So what does he do next, right? Can we get practical? Yeah, I cried my tears. I laid down and slept. I woke up the next day. I feel better, but the situation's still there. Now what? Look at verse 7. Arise, O Lord, save me, O my God, for you strike all my enemies on the cheeks. You break the teeth of the wicked. Salvation belongs to the Lord. Your blessing be on your people. The third step after you identify your problems and you acknowledge your God is to simply ask for His help. Ask for His help. And we call that praying, right? That's what we're talking about. Ask for God's help. David calls on the Lord in a beautiful way. Arise, O Lord, save me, O my God. You remember at the beginning I told you that word, many are rising against me, it would come back to us? Well, it's the same word here. When he says, arise, O Lord, he uses the same word that he used earlier when he said, many are rising against me. So he's saying, all these enemies are raising up to confront me, God. Would you, God, confront them? God, would you deal with my problem? Would you wrestle with this for me? Won't you call on the Lord to handle your problems, or do you want to just try to figure it out by yourself? And again, I'm talking to a room full of people I know who've kind of probably had it both ways in life. You can remember the times where you tried to sort it out on your own and how well that went for you. Hopefully you can also remember the times where you entrusted it to God and called on Him and you saw God moving away and do something you could not do. We are not equipped in our flesh to overcome the suffering of this life and untangle the problems of this life. We need God, and so we have to call on Him. When you call on the Lord, it's good to call on His promises. David says, arise, O Lord, save me, O my God. David calls out for salvation. The Lord had promised to save His people. Don't be afraid when you pray to ask God to do what He promised to do. Don't be afraid to say, God, in your word you said you would never leave me or forsake me. God, don't leave me or forsake me. In your word you said you would save your people. God, save me. In your word you said, call on the promises of God. He delights for us to come to Him in humble dependence, and He delights to deliver on His promises. You can also call on God's works, the things He's already done. You see, David says, David doesn't ask Him to strike enemies on his cheek and break their teeth. He says, you strike all my enemies on the cheek, you break the teeth of the wicked. David is recounting the reality that he's already seen God do for him. The things God has done in our lives already are a testimony to us of who God is and how He's able. And one of the strongest ways we can move ourselves forward in suffering is to remember what God's already done. David says, you've struck down so many enemies before me, God. Again, David, the great warrior of Israel, he's seen God give into his hand many thousands of enemies. And you can feel him as he prays, kind of recounting this in his head and remembering what God has done. And can I tell you something important? When David prays this prayer, he's not changing God's mind. He's reshaping his own heart and restoring his confidence in God. We often think about prayers if I just pull the right lever, God will do what I want Him to do. But truly, the greatest benefit and blessing of prayer is reshaping our hearts in alignment with who God is and what He's done. And call on God in confidence. Salvation belongs to the Lord. It's one of the primary reasons we pray, to express confidence in God. David kind of says, God, if you don't save, there's no salvation. Salvation belongs to you. But thank God he does save. He blesses his people abundantly and freely and generously. What is going on in your life right now that you need to ask for God's help with like this? What suffering are you facing where you need to call out to God in confidence? Don't let this be theoretical this morning. Don't leave here just thinking about how a situation somebody else is dealing with and how they need to call on God. Look in the mirror this morning and ask the question, God, where am I trying to figure out this myself? And I need to be calling on you. One last thought about David's prayer here. I want you to notice something. Do you see how profoundly simple this is? This whole psalm is 8 verses long. It's not very long. I mean, this is something you and I could scratch out on a napkin. 2 verses at the beginning identifying the problem, the bulk of it pointing himself and his heart towards God, acknowledging who God is, and then the last part that's going to kind of be a perpetual reality is just calling on God to help him. But when he calls on God, he doesn't use a lot of words and he doesn't use big words because God doesn't need you to impress him with the quantity or the quality of your words. He just wants you to call on him. Sometimes in the midst of great suffering, the best we can mutter is, help me, God. Help me. I need you. What suffering are you enduring today? Where do you find yourself stuck in the spiral of suffering? Perhaps only able to extensively identify the situation without any ability to find hope of a way forward. I would invite you today to take the next essential step. Acknowledge God in your suffering. He's still here with you and for you. Acknowledge him as God, as shield, as glory, as the one who lifts your head. Call out to him, cry before him. Have a good sleep. Wake up with a new confidence about who God is and what he has done. And continue to call out to him, asking for his help, knowing that he will answer, he will save. By all means, he will sustain you. He will strengthen you. He is the God who will bless his people. David kind of ends it and says, your blessing be on your people. If we have the blessing of God, there's nothing we lack. And he delights to give it to us. Let's go to him in prayer. Father, may you take the truth of your word and implant it deeply in our hearts and minds this morning in a way that we will not quickly move on from it. Would you help us, God, move past identifying our suffering to acknowledging you are God and to simply and consistently asking for your help. We need you, God. We need you in every situation. We need you, God, not only on days when we are aware of our present sufferings, but we need you on days that we think are good. Because on our best days, we still need much of your grace to sustain us. Help us, God, we pray in Jesus' name.